How would you initialize the variables that you set up in your TensorFlow program? This lecture will help you find the answer to this question. We are continuing to work on very simple math operations in TensorFlow. This time we'll introduce a new concept, variables. Variables in TensorFlow, just like variables in any other programming language, are a construct whose value can be changed at runtime. The values can be updated and new values can be assigned to those variables. Variables are a very core construct in TensorFlow and they are extremely important for machine learning operations. If you think of how machine learning works, those programs are essentially iterative. You run through the code multiple times, you perform multiple computations, feed back the error back to the beginning of your program, find new values which you assign to variables, and run through the iteration again. Iterative machine learning is possible using variables in TensorFlow. For this lab, we'll work on the code that's stored in the file Simple Math with Variables. Import the TensorFlow libraries at the very top, and then let's look at all the tensors that we've instantiated. We've set up a simple equation which represents a line. The equation for a line, if you remember, is y is equal to wx plus b. In this initial setup, notice that w and b are both variables. Both have some initial values that we've specified in the form of tensors. Both are float 32 and we've given both of them names, var underscore w and var underscore b. X is a placeholder. When we compute the value of y, the value of x has to be fed in. And y, which is the result of wx plus b, will also be a variable. If you use variables in your TensorFlow program, and the chances are you will, you have to run a special computation to initialize their values. Variables cannot be used before running this explicit initialization step called tf.global variables initializer to initialize all the variables that you've set up in your program so far. Instantiate a session, and within a session, the very first thing that you need to do is call session.run on init. This is the node that will initialize all your variables. With your variables initialized, you can now call session.run on y. Y requires the value of x before it can be computed, which is why you'll pass in the value of x using a feed dictionary. With these values of x and the initialized value of w and b, we get the final result for wx plus b as 30, 410. Let's assume that you have a whole bunch of variables in your program and you don't require all of them to be initialized for a particular computation. You can initialize just certain variables by using tf.variablesinitializer. Pass in the variables that you want to initialize as an argument to this function. Here we just want to initialize the variable w. Note that variable b has not been initialized. Instantiate a session and within it, try to compute the value of y. If you remember, y is equal to wx plus b, it requires the variable w as well as the variable b. Will this run successfully? Well, it won't. We only initialize the variable w. Computing y required the variable w as well as the variable b to be initialized. Our code will throw an error, and if you scroll down and look carefully at the error message, you'll find the correct reason there. Attempting to use uninitialized value var underscore b. So far, we've initialized a bunch of variables, but we haven't seen how we can update the value of a variable within a particular session. Here we set up two variables, one referenced by number and the other which is a multiplier. Number has been initialized to 10 and multiplier has been initialized to the value 1. Call tf.globalVariablesInitializer to initialize all the variables. We also set up another computation. We multiply number by multiplier and store the result in number. Instantiate a session, initialize all the variables by calling session.run on init, and we are now ready to change the values of our variables. Set up a for loop for I in range 5. It will iterate through its body 5 times. And within the for loop, the very first line of code computes the value of result called session.run on result. In the second line within the body of the for loop, increment the value of the multiplier by 1. Multiplier.assign add 1. Notice that we are changing the value of the variables in each of these session.run executions. Run this bit of code and let's see what the output looks like. The very first result is 10. The number was 10, the multiplier was 1. Number is equal to number multiplied by multiplier, which is equal to 10. In the next step, we increment the value of the multiplier by 1. The multiplier was originally 1, it now has the value 2. Now, when you compute the value of result, number is equal to 10, multiplier is equal to 2, and number is equal to number multiplied by multiplier gives you 20. And so on. In the next step, we increment the value of multiplier. It is now 3. We use this new value of multiplier, perform the multiplication with the current value of number, which is 20, to get a result of 60. Okay, we've performed a whole host of computations. Let's write out summary information to TensorBoard and view it in our visualization tool. Click on the Graphs tab, and here is the graph for our TensorFlow computation. The graph is pretty big because we performed a number of computations. I suggest you explore this and see if it makes sense to you. There is one interesting thing that I'll point out though. Notice the variable w, and notice that it is an input to 3 nodes with the prefix init. Init, init underscore 1, and init underscore 2. If you remember the program that we just looked at, we initialized w 3 times. Twice using the global variables initializer method and once using just initialize variables. Those are 3 initialization compute nodes, and w is an input to all 3. On the other hand, if you look at the variable b, it is an input to only 2 initialization compute nodes, init and init underscore 2. Init underscore 1 used the variables initializer to only initialize w. It did not initialize b. That's why we got the error in the first place. In this lecture, we learned 2 ways in which we can initialize variables that we instantiate in TensorFlow. One is using TF global variables initializer, which initializes all the variables that we've set up so far. And the second is using variables initializer, where we specify the variables that we want to initialize. Variables in TensorFlow have to be initialized before you can use them in your computation.